0, and we're live. Okay. Hello, Bio 375 class. Okay, we're going to go through these problems and just kind of explain to you guys how we did them. So for question number 1, it reads that the ABO blood group in humans assorts independently from the rhesus blood group trait and the MN blood group traits. And 3 alleles control the ABO locus, and the 2 alleles are a dominant allele producing Rh plus and are a recessive allele for Rh minus are found at the Rh locus, and the codominant alleles M and N occur at the MN locus. So for question A, we're given the scenario that a child with blood types O, Rh minus, and M is born to a woman who has blood types O, Rh minus, and MN, and a man who has blood types A, Rh plus, and M. So we need to determine a possible genotype for each parent and for the child. And so looking at their phenotypes, for the child, he's a type O blood group. And so he'd have to be 2 lowercase i's. And since he's an Rh minus, since Rh minus is a recessive allele, only occurs in the homozygous recessive, it's 2 lowercase r's. And since he is M for the MN locus, it's just M. So that means that it comes from 2 M's. And then for the dad is a type A, and the mom is a type O. And so in order for the dad and mom, when they cross, in order for them to have a type O child, the dad has to have a recessive allele. So he has a type A dominant allele and then a recessive allele for the blood type. And then since he's Rh positive, but his son is Rh negative, he needs to have a recessive allele for the R group as well. And then since he's M, he needs to have 2 M's. And then the mom is 2 lowercase i's and 2 lowercase r's because her child is the same. And then also she's an MN blood group because it tells us that, so she needs to have both of those. And then for B, what proportion of children born to a man with the genotype AB, RR, R, lowercase r, MN, and a woman who is born with IA, lowercase I, RR, NN will have blood types B, Rh minus, and MN. And so this is asking for a proportion. And when you cross these 2 people, the proportions for them, 1/4 of their children will have B blood, 1/4 will have the Rh minus, and 2/4 will have the MN group. And so you multiply all those together and get the 2/64, and that's the proportion. And then for C, it's kind of the same thing, except you're given different parents with different different genotypes. And so when you cross, 1/4 of them will have A blood, 3/4 of their children will have Rh plus, and 1/4 will have MN. And so you multiply those together and get 3/64. And then for D, it gives us the scenario that a man with blood types B, Rh plus, and N says he cannot be the father of a child with blood types O, Rh minus, and MN. The mother of the child has blood types A, Rh plus, and MN. Is this man correct? So he is not correct because both of them, they could be carriers of the recessive alleles. Therefore, one of their children could have the blood type O, Rh minus, and the MN. So that is question number 1, and it's just performing those different crosses and finding those proportions. And then for question 2, we're talking about the comb shape in chickens, and it's determined by the alleles of 2 independently assorting genes. So a walnut comb is produced when both genes involved contain at least 1 dominant allele. A rose comb is produced when at least 1 R, so 1 dominant R allele is present, while the second gene contains 2 recessive alleles. Then the pea comb is produced when the first gene contains 2 recessive alleles, while the second gene contains at least one dominant P allele. If an individual is homozygous recessive for both genes, a single clone is produced. Okay, and so for question A, we're asked the genotypes of the parents that produce the following progeny phenotype ratios. So for A, we're looking for a 1-to-1 to 1-to-1 ratio. So one walnut, one rose, one pea, one single. And when you work it out, when you try the different possibilities in the Punnett squares, the one parent must be heterozygous for both R and P, and then one parent must be homozygous recessive for R and P, and then that gives you the 1-to-1 to 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, and then for B, to get the 3 rows to 1 single, the genotypes of the parents must be, one parent must be heterozygous for both R and P, and then the other parent must be heterozygous for R, but homozygous recessive for P. And so when you combine them, you get that ratio, 3 rows to 1 single. And then for C, you have 1-to-1 ratio, 1 rows and 1 single. So the parents must have, one parent must be heterozygous for both R and P, and the other parent must be homozygous for homozygous recessive for R and P. And that gives you the 2 ratios, 4/16 and 4/16 for rows and for single. And so since they're both 4/16, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. And then D, there's 3 walnut and 1 rose, and both parents must be heterozygous for both R and P alleles. And that gives 9/16 walnut and 3/16 rose, which is a 3-to-1 ratio. And so, yeah, that again is just performing Punnett squares and performing those crosses and finding the ratios, and then, yeah, comparing those ratios to each other to find the different ones. So that's question 2. And then we're going to switch off.
All right. So moving on to number 3, it's talking about Palomino horses, and question A says, explain the inheritance of these coat color phenotypes in horses. So looking at the offspring of the crosses that we were given, I discovered that it had to be incomplete dominance, because it doesn't really seem like one is more dominant than the other. So I found out that this has to be the genotypes of the different horses. And I found that out by doing this cross of 2 Palomino horses that have one of each of the chestnut as well as the cremello allele. And so I crossed 2 Palominos, and I got 2 Palominos, 1 chestnut, and 1 cremello out of it, which is the first scenario we were given. And so that answers question B as well. The possible genotypes would be the Palomino would have, well, I assigned CT to chestnut and CCR to cremello. And so the Palomino would have CT and CCR, and the chestnut would have 2 CTs, and the cremello would have 2 CCRs. All right. So moving on to number 4. It's kind of cut and dry. So for number A, the enzyme coded by the IA and IB alleles is called glycosol transferase, which was found in the notes. And type B blood adds the sugar galactose to the surface of the carbohydrates on red blood cells. And B is overdominance, is a genetic phenomenon where heterozygotes have a reproductive advantage. And an example of that was given to us in the PowerPoint as well. And C, incomplete penetrance, is going to be the genetic phenomenon which an individual does not express the phenotype specified by their genotype. D would be epistasis, is when the alleles of one mask the phenotype effects of the other. And E is going to be PKU, is the disease that can be alleviated by modifying diet. And the Manx trait displays lethal inheritance. Let's see. So moving on to G. So this was a long question for a short answer. So we were talking and we found out that this is a question about the maternal effect, which means that the genotype of the mother is going to predict the phenotype of the offspring. So we found out that 60% of the offspring are going to be dextral because 30 were homozygous dominant and 30 were heterozygous. And 40% are going to be sinistral because 40% of the females in the group were sinistral with the homozygous recessive. And moving on to H, it's kind of the same thing, maternal inheritance. So 40% of the offspring are going to be green, while 60% are going to be white, because those are the phenotypes of the mothers.
Okay, perfect. So for question 5, we'll kind of just go through it briefly, but this one is talking about when 4 different alleles have complete dominance in a specific order. And so black is, whenever the black allele is present, B, it means that that's the color that the bunny will be, or the guinea pig, sorry. And then sepia is after that, after black. And then cream is after that, and then white is after that. And so white is the most, I guess, recessive of the genes, or the most lowest on the dominance pattern. And so for A, 50% black and 50% sepia offspring, we're supposed to find the genotypes of the parents, the genotypes and phenotypes of the parents. So for that one, you find that one of the parents has a B and an S genotype, meaning that they're black for their phenotype, and they have an SS. For the other parent has an SS and is sepia. And then for B, we need to find the genotype and phenotype for 75% of their offspring are sepia and 25% are cream. And so the genotype for one parent is SW, which is a sepia guinea pig, and the genotype for the other parent is SC, which is a sepia as well. And then for C, 50% black, 25% sepia, and 25% white. One parent needs to be BW as their genotype, meaning they're black. And one parent needs to be SW for their genotype, meaning they're sepia. And then for D, 75% black and 25% white. One parent needs to be BW and the other parent needs to be BW. And yeah, that way, like, the B is dominant over the W gene. And so 75% of them will be black and the other 25% will be white. So yeah, that concludes all of the problems and concludes our little teaching thing. Do you have anything to say, Haley?
No, that's it.
Okay, perfect. So there it is. Have a good day.